The FDA, there are ingredients that the FDA hasn't re-reviewed or hasn't reviewed at all in decades. This is the food dye issue, right? Where you've got red 3, yellow 5, blue 1, all of these food dyes. Many of them are actually byproducts of petroleum, which is pretty crazy when you start to think about it. They're linked to behavioral issues and like cognitive developmental issues in kids, so like hyperactivity, ADHD, et cetera. Red 3 has specifically been linked to thyroid dysfunction and thyroid cancer in rats since like the 1980s. These are ingredients that have been banned in Europe for a very long time. Interestingly, actually, red 3 was banned from cosmetics. So like it can't be in lipstick, and yet it's still allowed in food.
Nick Green, the co-founder and CEO of one of the coolest places to shop for groceries online, Thrive Market. How you doing, dude?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You know, I think a lot of people are aware of ordering healthy food online or just food online in general, but I don't think I've ever actually done a podcast about Thrive. However, I know that you have a pretty deep body of knowledge that goes beyond that, including things like, you know, the USDA food standards and maybe a lot of things that are going on right now while we're recording this. I think yesterday it was the banning of food dyes. I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts on that. But how do you describe what you do to people? Like if I'm sitting next to you on an airplane or we have a really long elevator ride from 0 to the 30th floor.
Yeah, well, I haven't done the elevator pitch in a long time, but basically, you know, for us, it starts with just a really big mission, which is we think healthy, natural, organic, sustainable products should be accessible, affordable, available to anyone. So that's what we get up to do every day. It's why we started the company. And really, like at a super high level, Thrive Market is aiming to be the platform that makes healthy living accessible to anyone.
So did you grow up with like hippie parents eating granola and sawdust, or what got you interested in this?
No, it's interesting. My co-founder did. So my co-founder, Gunnar, grew up on a communal farm in Ojai, California.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me, by the way. I think I met him at a yoga retreat or something like that.
Exactly. If you know Gunnar, it won't surprise you. And, you know, he basically grew up, they were doing wholesale buying of organic food, you know, back in the 70s and 80s for the farm, also growing a lot of their own food. And this is in Ojai, California, where, you know, there was this like huge organic movement that, you know, had been going at that point already for a couple decades. I had kind of a very different experience growing up, different and the same. So the different part was I was in Minneapolis or outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. So like think middle class Midwest in the 90s, you know, processed food, fast food, you know, sugared cereal, all of that stuff was like the norm. But I had a mom who was very determined to chart a different path. So
really?
So we were like the weird house on the block that had, you know, no soda on the table. We didn't even have a soda in the house, let alone on the table at dinner time. You know, we weren't allowed to have sugared cereal. So it was like Cheerios was the fanciest thing that we could have for breakfast. And it was for her, it went back to actually her family had a lot of like obesity, type 2 diabetes. Diabetes was the big thing. Multiple siblings that had diabetes. Her mom had diabetes very early. And so she was like making these changes for herself back in the 90s and like basically enforced it on the family in a way that we hated at the time, but ultimately ended up being, you know, basically breaking a generational cycle.
You weren't the cool kids.
We were. Oh, no, we were. I mean, for a variety of reasons, we were not the cool kids, but that certainly was one of them. And, you know, the crazy thing was I just got to see firsthand like what it did on the positive, but I also saw how hard it was for her to do it. You know, it's like we didn't have a Whole Foods down the street. If we had, like, we wouldn't have been able to afford the price premiums. And so she was doing it on a budget. She was doing it without a lot of access. And then she was also doing it at a time where, like, you know, no internet, no health and wellness influencers. Like, she was like researching at the library.
No Food Babe cookbooks.
No. But like, it's pretty incredible. Like, again, she was very ahead of her time, but, you know, managed to get the basics right. And honestly, I think, you know, my personal philosophy on nutrition still is an 80-20, and she really did it. And so the genesis of Thrive was I had started a company in college, sold that and moved out to LA for the earnout, the acquiring company was based here. And, basically was kind of blown away getting to SoCal. This is in 2013, 2014. And it's like, wow, there's like this health and wellness world. And so I went deep into it, having, remember, like had that experience growing up from my mom. And it was like, this is a movement now. Like there's like millions of people that want this. And, it was like my mom was no longer the weird person. Like this is the norm now here. And yet the thing that blew my mind and the opportunity and the problem we're trying to solve with Thrive is that despite that movement, it's still really hard to get healthy, right? And the stats are kind of mind blowing. Like half of people don't live within driving distance of a health food store. The price premium on organic is still ridiculous in most cases.
Yeah, you got the $36 jars of coconut yogurt at Erewhon.
Totally, yeah. And it's like if you're affluent in a place like LA or New York or San Francisco, fine, it's easy. But if you're anywhere else in the country, or frankly, even if you're in LA, New York, or San Francisco, and you're not, making enough money to spend at Erewhon or go to Whole Foods, it's really challenging. And then I think the one thing that's different and kind of interesting in like an opposite way is like when my mom was doing it, the issue was like not enough information. Now you've almost got this like information overload where people are like hearing all the influencers online saying opposite things. Up is down, left is right, like protein's good, protein's bad, fat's good, fat's bad. And you can literally find an argument for anything. And I think for a lot of people, the question is just like where to start, what's right for me, what the heck do I do? It's kind of, a lot of people are just paralyzed.
Yeah. And you also don't see a lot of flexibility in the influencer scene because it's hard to turn your back on an argument that you've made in the past when your paycheck depends on you being right.
This is a whole rabbit hole we can go into. And there's like this, it's like the polarization of all dialogue in this country, right? Whether it's political, ideological, economic, and health. It's not conducive to truth.
I joke sometimes from stage that if you want to make a lot of money in the nutrition industry, one of the ways to do it is to write a book and create a villain in the book that is going to kill everybody, and then if you're really smart, towards the latter pages of the book, you design or talk about a supplement that you've created to nuke the villain and champion that as the one perfect diet for all of humankind. And it's just, it's a great business model, but it creates a lot of confusion, when there's like 12 books on the market, each with a different villain.
Yeah. So silver bullets abound. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's tough. So Thrive, like we approach our business as let's break down each of the barriers to healthy living. So the first one we break down is geography. So we ship anywhere in the lower 48. And, the assortment is highly, highly curated. So it's all 100% non-GMO on the food side, 600 plus banned ingredients across all categories, like even more curated than you find at Whole Foods. Like we carry across the same number of categories in non-perishable, an order of magnitude fewer SKUs. So the idea is like outsource your trust to us, make it simple, know that everything clears this high bar. And then because we have a smaller assortment, we can actually do a lot of work to tag all the products so people can find the right products for them. And like, you may not know what keto is, but if you're interested in that diet, click a filter, it all filters down. If you got a kid with a nut allergy, a spouse that's lactose intolerant, click, it all filters. And so there we break down this barrier of just like intimidation. Where do I start? How do I read the labels? On Thrive, you don't have to. And then a big part of it is also on price. So we operate on a membership model. Think like Costco for healthy food. $60 a year. Every paid membership sponsors one for a low-income family. And then that membership helps us to offer the products at below retail prices. So our the theoretical goal, which we don't always achieve, but we sure get pretty close, is let's get the natural, organic, better for you product at or below a conventional equivalent.
Yeah, I think I've described it in the past like Costco met Whole Foods and had a baby. Really healthy seed oil free baby. So how about AI? Has that changed anything for you in terms of like allowing people to auto populate their carts in a different way or change the filtration mechanisms or anything like that?
Yes. So, one of the advantages of being online is that we have a lot of data. Right. So like if you go into the grocery store, the only data your grocery store has is like what's on the receipt. And like you may come back, they don't even know that you're the one that they're not tracking longitudinally what you purchased. And so we can track that data to drive personalization for people over time. And we've done that for years. So just running big machine learning algorithms to create recommendations of what to buy when, based on not only what you've done, but also like aggregating the data across others like you. Just like think giant correlation models. You can really give people, and this isn't just us, right? Amazon does an incredible job of this too, where those product recommendation engines get really good. The difference for us is we're purpose built for healthy living. So everything is focused around these like health dynamics. We also have an onboarding experience where people voluntarily share, like, this is what I'm trying to achieve. These are the values I care about. These are the dietary restrictions I have. And then they actually shop using those filters. So we get all of this metadata across the entire assortment and across purchase behavior. What's been really interesting in the last like 18 to 24 months, which is the tie into AI, is we've gone one step further in helping members build the cart, like basically for them. So like it used to be when you came on Thrive, you would take an onboarding quiz and you would get popped into, we called it My Aisle. So I was like the way I described it is like, imagine a magical store experience where instead of having to walk down every aisle and find the stuff that's relevant for you, it's like all in one place.
I could just walk in and have the Ben Greenfield aisle, which would be like avocado, dark chocolate, sardine, blueberry, like literally like my team, my EA team, when I travel, they have the list that they're supposed to order that is at my hotel room, above the mini fridge when I get there.
That's it. Yeah. So that was like the circa 2020 or 2022 version. The flip more recently is we're creating like the Ben Greenfield cart, right? And so like when you come on Thrive Market, you give us the same data, but now that like machine learning algorithm is powerful enough that we can recommend products that are like so close to what you actually want to buy. In fact, 50% of the time, approximately, they are what you want to buy, and we'll just build the cart for you. So you end up then, like the average cart on Thrive first order is like 15 items. If you're building that from scratch, it takes a lot of time. You're going to forget things, like et cetera, et cetera. Now we're seeing about half of the items people end up actually checking out with are items that the AI will load into the cart. So it's still early days, and honestly, there's so much headroom still, I think, to achieve more here. But like the direction that it's going is, you're in a unique position to have EAs that help you to do that when you travel. We want to bring this to like anybody.
Right. People don't have to have some team doing it for them. But I'd still do it once over to make sure it didn't do some like, substitute cashews for macadamia nuts or smoked oysters for sardines. Like,
right. So this is like really critical. And part of like our promise to our members is making sure they're still in control. So I think there's so many e-commerce services, and like everyone's had this experience where it's like, you get like force fed into a subscription. All of a sudden you've got like a pile of these products that you didn't remember you'd subscribe to, and they like show up and stuff. With Thrive, we really focus on the member having final control. So like we think about that cart build is not set it and forget it. It's like, that's an intelligent default. You then edit it. And then, a lot of our members actually do go into auto ship, but like over 90% of those orders are edited before they go out. So again, like to your point, it's like your AI assistant loads the cart, helps you get started, but then, you do that last 20% to make sure it's what you want when you want it.
Yeah. What about when it comes to AI? And I have no clue if you've even thought about this, but it's something I think would be cool if you could ever roll this out. Like somebody's gotten genetic tests, blood panels, maybe they have their Apple Health data or something like that. Could you, in theory, like get to a point where people are able to upload their labs and have something like foods chosen based on their genetic profile, or, companies like, Viome have the list of foods that are supposed to be good for your gut and the foods that are bad for your gut. You think you could ever get to a point like that, or are there kind of like legalities around that would restrict you from doing that?
There's not legalities as long as people are voluntarily sharing the information, right? And right now, our members already share a lot of information about themselves. That, of course, is something that we keep completely anonymized. So there's no, like, people will share, here's the diet I'm on, here are my health goals, here's what's going on in my family. That's something that it only informs the model from an anonymized standpoint. But it is really powerful already. The way it functions today is it's like self-reported, and then it's self-selected. So like someone knows that they have, high LDL cholesterol, or they have high ApoB or some other risk factors for heart disease. They can choose, like we literally have a heart healthy filter that, and there's debate obviously on what is heart healthy, but like if you want to be on a low saturated fat diet, like here's items that could be could be good for you.
Right. Depends whether you ask the American Heart Association or someone who might not be in the pockets of, I don't know, the grain or the oil industry.
It starts to get really complicated because the link between biomarkers and nutrition, or rather nutrition to biomarkers, these are debated issues. But in theory, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's super exciting, like I was an early investor in Function Health. Like there are now more and more platforms going direct to consumer where people are tracking their biomarkers, and they're already in their own lives seeing how their health habits, whether it's nutrition or exercise or sleep, affect them. So I think more than likely we already have members that are basically buying in that way. And absolutely over time, we can use AI to basically turbocharge that.
Yeah, this came up when I was interviewing Brandon Dawson from 10X. He was describing to me how they were trying to create like a QR code that you could scan when you get to the grocery store. And the QR code is linked to your genetic and blood data. And then it would kind of auto-populate your cart based on that. I don't know how far into that process they are, but I thought, gosh, that would be just so cool to be able to have something customized based on your biomarkers or your genetics.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and I think it will happen for sure. When you mentioned that, it made me think about one feature we've got on our app is it's a barcode scanner where you can literally scan any item, if you're at the grocery store, and either find out if we carry it at a better price at Thrive, which we often do, or if it's an unhealthy item, find a healthier, better for you alternative. And then you think about put AI on top of that, and you can then help people build a cart with that as the seed for it. So there's so much that's going to happen over the next few years, and as everyone knows, the space is moving super, super fast.
Yeah. Playing devil's advocate, another thing I'll sometimes say when I'm talking to people about nutrition or giving a talk is, you shouldn't be relying on these scanning food apps too much, because if you're scanning everything that you are eating, by the nature of that, you're eating out of packages. So I tell people, and this is like an old adage, this is my idea, but shop around the perimeter of the grocery store where you're going to find the meat and the veg and the produce and the eggs and the dairy, et cetera. How do you tackle that with Thrive, where people probably perceive that it's just a lot of stuff in boxes and bags? And don't get me wrong, like dark chocolate covered sea salt almonds are incredible, but you also have to tackle this idea of eating as close to the earth as possible. So how do you think about that?
Totally. I mean, first, whether something is perishable or non-perishable, that's just, does it go in a refrigerator or freezer or not? And you can have ultra processed foods in both of those categories, and you can have, whole foods in both of those categories. Now, often the packaging is part of the processing that, so there's a tendency, and it's not a bad heuristic to say middle of the grocery store is going to be more likely to be unhealthy stuff. But, we actually see that as then, more value that we can add, because that's the place that people normally make the most mistakes, right? Where they're usually if you go around the perimeter, for the most part, most things are not going to be horrible for your health. You go in the center, it's almost flipped. Most products in a typical grocery store now are ultra processed. And so, we're basically taking that part, which is more than 50% of what people buy at the grocery store, and saying, all right, here's better for you alternatives. Here's a price that's better for you. Here's a convenience model that's better for you. Oh, and by the way, if you can save money on that half of your grocery basket, now you can spend a little more to get organic or get cleaner products as you go around the perimeter. We also have started to get to the perimeter. So frozen, for example, today is our fastest growing category. So we were doing that with a third party logistics provider before, because we didn't have the frozen capability in our fulfillment centers. But last year we actually in-housed that because we were seeing such strong demand. And now many of the things that people could buy fresh, like meat and seafood, for example, or veg, we sell frozen. And there's an argument that I find pretty compelling that the nutritional quality on those products is actually better. If you think from a supply chain standpoint, you flash freeze at the point of pick. Yeah, if you look at the decay curve on nutrient.
Oh, so they're literally kind of I do It's one company I work with, Seatopia. Like I get flash frozen fish, and it seems like it doesn't change the texture of the fish much. It's something about that flash freezing process. But walk me through how you guys are tackling the frozen piece.
Yeah, so with meat and seafood, there's really no difference in nutrient quality. You can, as most people know, you can leave it in the freezer for a long time. Where it's really impactful in a positive way is flash freezing at the point of pick for any fruit or veg, particularly like leafy greens, which have like a precipitous decay curve over a matter of weeks, like to the point that when you're buying, lettuce, broccoli, et cetera, at the grocery store, it may have lost anywhere from 40 to 80 or 90% of its nutrient value, micronutrient value by the time you are consuming it. And so the argument is, and I think the evidence shows that properly frozen veg and fruit, look, there's veg and fruit that you're not going to freeze, so it doesn't apply to every subcategory. But in the ones you do, it's actually got better nutrient density. And then I think for the meat and seafood side, the advantage is being able to source, from supply chains that you might not be able to do fresh. And like hopefully in the future, you're going to have more domestic produced meat and seafood that is also high quality. But like, for example, in the US today, beef, even grass-fed beef, and this is, I think a lot of your listeners probably know this, but even grass-fed beef is often grain finished. And so if you look at the like fat profile, for example, of those animals, they're not that different than a grain-fed animal.
I know those bastards. They can get away with it though. People like grass fed, and I think more and more people are becoming aware of this. But yeah, grass fed isn't grass fed.
Totally, it's like if grass fed, if it tastes like grain fed, it's because it probably has a nutrient profile that's more like grain fed.
Yeah, and I won't lie. Like I do like if I go to a steakhouse and I'm getting a full on fed from birth oodles, metric crap tons of grain cow, it tastes better. But the problem is like, I know enough about what that does to the body to where I don't even enjoy the experience as much, just because I know, it's kind of like once you know how bad a Big Mac is for you, it no longer melts in your mouth with luscious goodness. It's more like, crap, let's just do it to my heart now.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss, right? But yeah, so like meat and seafood is one of our fastest growing categories. Frozen, we think, is a huge opportunity for innovation. And yeah, like over time, today we're still largely non-perishable food, but we've got so much opportunity to keep growing across some of these perishable categories, and then also getting in outside of food.
Yeah. With the packaging, obviously microplastics is a big issue now, and you still see a lot of healthy foods that are shipped in plastic. Are you guys starting to think about that, or have you thought about that?
Thinking about it a lot. I mean, it's when you start testing product and seeing the presence of microplastics and PFAS, it's like you just can't get away from it. And I know people are now more proactive folks, myself included, are doing like microplastic testing on as an individual to see the level of exposure, and like nobody's escaping that.
Yeah. And by the way, more prevalent than a lot of, like yesterday, I was researching toasters. They actually line the toasters, the little cage where the toaster, so the bread slips out more easily. That's lined with essentially like metals and PFAS that can leach into your toast. So you start to look into this, you're like, crap, it's all over.
Yeah, well, you have like a paper cup and it has a plastic liner. You have a can, a metal, an aluminum can, and that has potentially a plastic liner as well.
Plastic versus silicone spatula. It's solvable. Fortunately, there are companies like one that comes to mind is From Our Place, right? They're starting to do really good cookware, air fryers, toasters, et cetera. But yeah, with food, what do you do as far as the packaging?
So, I mean, we've reduced plastic packaging is something we've been at war with since the very beginning of the business. And, unfortunately, in some categories, there just aren't great alternatives. But like we reduced about 98% of plastic packaging in our orders. So like we're not wrapping and putting additional plastic on things. On the private label side, so like the Thrive Market brand, it's only 10% of our assortment, but it's like 25% of our sales. So a lot of our like most innovative products are actually things that we're developing ourselves, working with co-packers. And there we have a lot more control over the packaging. Indirectly, like we have with our just standards and admission onto the platform with brands, we also push them to move away from plastic packaging. Obviously, like BPA free is a non-negotiable. But now the microplastics issue is becoming one that we're focusing in on. And one of the cool things actually as a retailer is we can do, like, we work with a lot of innovative brands that are still young and they're not necessarily at big scale. And so they like things that could be really expensive for them. If we come together and as a platform, open source kind of what we're doing, like we did this, for example, with plastic, with plastic neutral credits. We actually worked with an organization and opened it up to the brands. And then they work on plastic reduction, but then also have better costing on the plastic offsets. So it is not a problem that's solved.
So there's like the equivalent of carbon offset for plastics.
There's the equivalent of carbon. I mean, the challenge with that is it's mostly focused on the environmental issue of like plastic waste disposal. I think the part that, just being perfectly candid, we haven't solved and no one has solved is presence of plastic packaging, as a substrate on food. And I think we've done better than anyone else. Like if you just look at the percentage of products that are out of plastic packaging, everything BPA free, et cetera, we're very good. But like the truth, it's like relatively good, but nobody's good. And I think that will change over the next 5 to 10 years. And like one of the things that we've seen is as these like issues come into the zeitgeist, regulators are always very slow to react, but consumers are not. And so, a platform like ours where consumers are savvy, like we can start like actually leaning out into new innovation, get credit for it. And it's like a good business decision, but it also is like, it's, creating scale in these supply chains for better products or better packaging.
Yeah. When it comes to USDA food standards, because I think a little while ago you mentioned like 600 different things that you guys kind of banned from being allowed in the products that you would sell at Thrive Market. I don't think I've ever really talked on the podcast before about how those standards got or are developed, in terms of actual USDA food standards and how that's created such a pervasive issue in our grocery shopping environment. Do you know much about the USDA food standard system and how that's set up?
I know too much. Too much for my own satisfaction.
You're the perfect person. Fill us in.
Yeah, and just like as backstory, we our entry to engaging with the USDA was petitioning the USDA back in 2015 to start accepting food stamps online. Like we just thought it was crazy that you could go to the corner store and buy soda with food stamps, but you couldn't buy healthy food online. And that was a 10-year process.
I was going to say 10 years. That must have been pretty recent. People can use Snap at Thrive?
You can use Snap at Thrive. You can use Snap at Thrive. Cool. We were the first pure play e-commerce retailer to be accepted. About 3 or 4 years ago, they started to finally bring brick and mortar in that had an online presence. You could use your food stamps on like Walmart.com or something like that. But we were the first pure play e-commerce retailer. And so we like saw firsthand how hard it was to get things done with the USDA. And it's nothing against the USDA per se, but just these agencies are big. The USDA has been around since like literally 1862. Like it was started under Lincoln. So they are huge. They have a lot of different kind of convoluted and bureaucratic layers. There's a lot of parts of it that may be kind of vestigial from prior eras.
Right. Stuff that possibly even Elon Musk might not be able to make a dent in.
I think it's going to be really tough. We'll see. It's going to be really tough. And again, it's not like the USDA ultimately, like it took 10 years, but they did make this change. So change is possible. There's good people working in these agencies. They are aware of some of or many of the problems. And I think reform is possible. It's just really hard. And if you look at the USDA, the structural challenge that they have is that their original mandate was not around food standards or food safety. It was around the promotion of the agriculture industry. So it is literally like for supporting farmers. And so it was only later that it evolved to encompass food safety, dietary guidelines, food labeling, food labeling is interesting because that's like there's overlap with the FDA there. So you've got this there's an issue with agencies that are siloed, and then there's also an issue with agencies kind of stepping on each other's toes. But the fundamental challenge that the USDA has is the inherent conflict of interest between being an agency that is there to promote commodity crops like corn, soy, and wheat on behalf of farmers, and then setting safety standards and nutritional guidelines.
You mean that there could be financial interest in, say, taking some kind of a byproduct of corn growth and, I don't know, elephant in the room, high fructose corn syrup, and having incentives to put that into the food supply?
Yeah. And I think this is like beyond debate at this point, right? When you look at the number of things that have, to take your example of high fructose corn syrup or just corn byproducts in general, it's like just sort of ludicrous. And that is because of like the USDA is there to serve, among other like agricultural sub-industries, corn. And then you have the direct incentives that come from lobbying, right? Where there are huge industry lobbies that are well funded and they carry a lot of sway that are have been for decades and actually more than a century influencing agencies like the USDA. So it's not quite the inmates running the asylum, but it is way too close for comfort. And I would say if you look at the kind of twin mandate of the USDA around food safety and food like nutritional guidelines or food standards, they've done pretty well on food safety. Like if you look at the US compared to any other country, pathogen reduction, safe handling procedures, cooking temperatures, testing, like this stuff is like actually very good in the US. And we should be very grateful for that.
Right. And then to clarify, you're not talking about like the ingredients that are actually allowed in food. You're talking more about the contaminants that are not allowed.
Yeah. So like the and this is again where you have to understand the difference between the USDA and the FDA. So the FDA actually does a lot broader in terms of categories. Like USDA is really focused on meat, poultry, certain egg products, and then nutritional guidelines. But like its food safety mandate is quite narrow. But it's like, eggs and poultry, meat are like places where there can be real food safety issues. And we shouldn't take that for granted that the USDA has done a terrific job and that you can eat raw eggs in the US. You should not everyone does this, but you can, and you're not going to get sick. For the most part, we have very, very good, clean supply chains that are well regulated and well controlled from the safety standpoint. Where we've had, I think, a total failure is on the nutritional standards and guidelines. And so, this is now I think wide out in the open, but the food pyramid that, you and I grew up on in the 1990s with refined carbohydrates as the base, with this idea that the cause of heart disease was fats, where, different types of fats weren't distinguished between at all, where sort of carbohydrates were universally good, where the idea of glycemic load just wasn't even in the picture.
Yeah, which unlike you, by the way, that's what I was raised. I was raised on, really, not even the food pyramid. It was more like taking baked pizzas, 29-cent hamburger, 39-cent cheeseburger day, gallons and gallons of, fat-free milk. Even we had a lot of milk powder.
I mean, some of what you're saying there was very compatible, right, with the food pyramid, right? Like low-fat milk, for example.
Yeah. It's kind of like my parents accidentally followed the food pyramid because we were just buying what was cheap and what could feed me and my 4 siblings,
And the problem with the food pyramid was both what it said, but then also what it didn't say. So I think probably the biggest failure of the overarching paradigm was the absolute lack of attention to food quality and food processing. At the end of the day, at least my perspective is you can have a diet that has very different macros and still be healthy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You could technically, you're right. You could hit rewind. You could follow the food pyramid. And, if your dairy is maybe some, really good fermented yogurt and kefir, and your grains are good whole grains without synthetic folic acid additives, and, and your meat is from goods, you could technically follow something close to the food pyramid. And this is, based on what's the actual biochemical law? I'm blanking on it right now, but it's an equation that dictates that if you're consuming a higher percentage of carbohydrates, your body becomes efficient at glucose oxidation. Same for fat with fat oxidation, and that the human body is pretty plastic, not microplastic, but yeah. has a great deal of plasticity in terms of what we can actually metabolize. So you see many populations thriving on a high fat, low carb diet, others on a high carb, low fat diet.
Yeah, this was the Weston Price insight, right? Is like,
exactly. It's the quality that trumps everything.
That's exactly right. So yeah, I do think that the pyramid itself has problems, but the biggest thing is that not identifying processing and particularly ultra processed foods as the problem, as the culprit, was a major miss. And that is not a coincidence, right? Like, the reason for the push towards ultra processing is it benefits businesses and suppliers and manufacturers and the agriculture industry because it's cheap.
It's cheap, and you sell more of it because it's highly palatable and addictive.
It's exactly. It's cheap. It's appealing. It's a better economic model in the short term, but it's got all of these externalities that are being produced in terms of health and downstream consequences that just weren't taken into account. So what I will say is there has been progress. So if you look at like the 2020 through 2025 nutritional standards and guidelines, like, there's more of an emphasis on whole grains, so like distinguishing between ultra processed and refined grains versus whole grains. But like, they still don't distinguish between different fat types, right? It's still completely focused on macros versus quality. And I think another thing, which may just be the nature of the beast, but like, it assumes one size fits all, right? And the reality is, depending on one's own, and this goes back to your point around like shopping by biomarkers, right? But like, different people respond to different things, different macro nutrients differently.
Right, exactly. Like, if you're sub-Saharan African or Southeast Asian genetics, you're going to metabolize carbs, high amounts of fructose, et cetera, more efficiently than a Northern European.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, when you look at just to get back to how the standards are set, like, the USDA reviews them in theory every 5 years. So that's probably not enough frequency given how fast like knowledge is changing. You've got heavy influence from these industry groups and lobbies, and not surprised. And then you have years and years, or decades and decades, a century plus of accumulated kind of morass in the standards and the agency. And not surprisingly, it's pretty tough to get things to the right place.
Yeah. People say it's different in Europe. I mean, I travel to Europe. I look at labels. There's still a lot of crap, and it seems like dyes and preservatives, et cetera, in Europe. But is that true? Is it a myth? Like, what's the whole USA versus Europe thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because anecdotally, you'll hear people be like, "I went to Europe and like I ate like pasta all day and I felt great." Right? I went to, and like, you wonder like, well, is that what you were eating? Was it that you were active all day because you were walking around?
By the way, I will throw this in that I would say that the lower amounts of herbicides used on wheat crops in a country like Italy could, in my opinion, potentially cause someone to have less digestive distress when consuming a bowl of pasta in Italy versus America. But I think there's considerations that go beyond just herbicides, right?
Yeah. No, so to be clear, there absolutely are differences. Like, when you look at so this is FDA and USDA stuff, but like, the FDA is responsible for like the banning of ingredients. If you look at the European standard, they basically they use like what's called the precautionary principle, where it is an ingredient has to be proven safe before it is allowed to be added to the food supply. So it's like a guilty until proven innocent.
And what would safe be considered?
So it means there have to actually be studies that show over time no deleterious consequences to health, no toxicity. And if there are studies that show the opposite, that like it's not going in.
Yeah, but how's that any different than like grass in the USA? Generally recognized as safe.
Grass is literally the opposite, right? Generally recognized as safe is a loophole that allows companies to put what they want in until it is shown definitively to be unsafe. So the burden is actually on on consumer groups or on the FDA itself to prove that an ingredient shouldn't be there. So like, those two approaches, like opt-in, opt-out kind of thing, are just radically different in what the effect is over time.
So if I understand properly, what you're saying is safe in Europe means that there's been robust human research demonstrating whether or not something has adverse effects on the human body. generally recognized as safe in the US means there's really not any or not much research that's been done on this, but proceed at your own risk. It appears to be okay.
Yeah, generally recognized as safe is proceed at your own risk because we don't know. And if we don't know, then the ingredient is allowed to be in the food supply. So like, just to be really clear there too, like the FDA, there are ingredients that the FDA hasn't re-reviewed or hasn't reviewed at all in decades, right? So like, this is the food dye issue, right? Where you've got red 3, like red 3, yellow 5, blue 1, there's like all of these food dyes. Many of them are actually byproducts of petroleum, which is pretty crazy when you start to think about it. But like those three, the three I just named, for example, are, they're linked to behavioral issues and like cognitive developmental issues in kids. So like hyperactivity, ADHD, et cetera. Red 3 has specifically been linked to thyroid dysfunction and thyroid cancer in rats since like the 1980s. These are ingredients that have been banned in Europe for a very long time. Interestingly, actually, the red 3 was banned from cosmetics. So like it can't be in lipstick in the early 1990s, I think in 1990, and yet it's still allowed in food.
Can't smear it on your lips, but you can eat it.
But you can ingest it. And so the really bad thing there is like, kids aren't putting lipstick on, but they are eating Fruit Loops and Skittles. And like these dyes are most common in items that are being consumed by children, in part because children like bright colors, and in part because they are used basically to mask the unhealthiness of ultra processed food. So like one of the effects of ultra processed food, they make it taste really good, but it ends up looking really bad. There's like no natural coloring that's going to be left in that thing. So you just put a bunch of artificial coloring in, which costs cents per ton.
I heard that like a lot of stuff like these cereals due to the ultra processing would be like gray.
Exactly. Yeah, of course. It's like any industrial byproduct, right?
Who's going to eat gray Cheerios?
No, like the kids want color. But it's almost like this, not to get like conspiracy theory, but it's like a sleight of hand, right? It's like a magician doing a trick on our children, where it's like, we're going to take something that if you looked at that would not be at all appealing because there is no nutrient value. Right, like color is in nature. Color is a proxy for health.
It's the equivalent of beer goggles for kids.
Yeah, it's like now we're going to take this like industrial byproduct. We're going to put color in it, so it triggers the kind of pleasure sensors of children, and they're going to and then we're also going to put a bunch of sugar in it or high fructose corn syrup. So like the taste and the look signals to us health when in fact it's anything but.
Right. And back to the beer goggles analogy, you wake up 40 years later with diabetes and roll over and ask, gosh, what the hell did I just sleep with?
What happened? Yeah. So it's pretty crazy. Like the food dye issue is obviously now coming to the fore. And like in the case of Red 3, California banned it in 2023, finally. So like you have this like state patchwork thing that's happening where some states are being more proactive. And then the FDA, actually 2 months ago in February, did come out and say, we are banning it. But then it's just nuts. They gave manufacturers 2 years to come into compliance. So like they've acknowledged that this is it's a toxin. It shouldn't be in the food supply. They, I think implicitly have acknowledged that they're decades late in making this happen. But then they said we're going to give manufacturers another 2 years to actually do it.
Wow. Okay, so back to Thrive. Let's say me and my wife Jessa, we come to you and we're like, hey, we want to get in the Thrive market. We have these beautiful Ben and Jessa sweet potato popsicles that we've been making in our kitchen. We want to go big time. A company comes to you. What do you look at? What are you analyzing to decide whether or not it's going to be allowed in Thrive Market?
Basically, what we're trying to do is pick up where the FDA has maybe dropped the ball, and then go and informed by higher standard areas like the EU, but actually going even further. So, like we have 600 plus banned ingredients, no artificial colors, no preservatives, no artificial sweeteners. We're not like no hydrogenated oils, no high fructose corn syrup, like all of the obvious bad stuff is just off.
But there's some gray areas there. Sorry, I don't want to derail you, but like artificial sweeteners, let's say like, I don't know, erythritol, right? Sugar alcohol. Is that allowed? Is it not? Is it artificial, natural? How do you approach stuff like that?
Yeah. So, and the truth is we try to follow the evidence. So like we do have like stevia is a common ingredient, and a sugar alternative can sometimes be better than a sugar, or like arguably is better than a sugar.
Like allulose, for example, it's actually good for glycemic variability and insulin sensitivity. It's technically different than sugar. Kind of looks like a chemical on the label, but it's actually super healthy.
Yeah. So we like allulose, monk fruit sweetener are on Thrive Market. So the sweeteners question is a little bit is a subtle one. Like one of the big things that we look to avoid is added sugar. And that again is not one that we can draw an absolutely hard line on, because there are cases where the nature of the product, like you'd basically have to eliminate a whole category if you're not going to have any added sugar. So we try. I mean, the balancing act that we have to play is meeting people where they are, like having the categories that people want, but also doing it in a way that like plants our flag on the things that matter. So like no high fructose corn syrup is just a commitment we've made, because like if you want sweet, there's ways to sweeten it that don't have high fructose corn syrup. And it's also like a good proxy, because if something has high fructose corn syrup, there's probably a lot of other bad stuff happening. We're entirely non-GMO on food. That's not because we're against genetic engineering, but because most of the genetic engineering in the U.S. in U.S. agriculture is to be pesticide and herbicide resistant. So like, a super majority of people test positive for glyphosate in their urine.
To clarify, what you're saying is if you're buying a GMO product, it's likely that it has been sprayed with pesticide and herbicide.
That's right. Because the whole point of genetically modifying that that commodity or that crop in the first place was to enable heavier spraying of pesticides. So like, we're non-GMO on the food side. I'd say 98% is certified organic. The 2% that's not certified organic is going to be organic in practice. On the meat side, focusing on grass-fed, pasture-raised, looking at sustainability of harvesting practices. We also try to audit the like sort of brand practices. So like looking at the cleanness of their supply chain from an animal cruelty standpoint, from a kind of ethical employer standpoint. This stuff can be burdensome for some brands. So we're not like looking for like, you got to collect a bazillion certifications, but being common sense on that stuff. And then to your question earlier, like packaging is a big deal. And that's one that we try to work collaboratively with the brands, because it's hard, but reducing plastic packaging and then focusing on compostable and recyclable materials where possible. But the biggest thing by far is just like starting from, all right, here's hundreds of ingredients that you're going to find all over the grocery store that are demonstrably bad for human health, and just like take those out.
Now, the part about sustainability or, animal welfare kind of makes me think about something I've been wondering about beef tallow, because someone commented to me, this is a couple of weeks ago, that, there's tons of beef tallow to go around to replace seed oils. Look at all these huge cattle operations. They're basically not using their beef tallow. We can just use that to replace seed oils. And at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, but isn't that kind of like indirectly keeping large-scale cattle operations that are doing a poor job with animal welfare or what they're feeding the cattle and the beef that gets produced from that kind of in business, right? Doesn't it create like an altogether different problem?
Yeah, not only that, but it also like the health profile of the fats.
Right, exactly. Yeah, fats are where a lot of animals, pigs especially, but cows also concentrate a lot of the toxins. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad you actually brought up seed oils, because that's, it's a hot button issue as well. And actually a very good example of the failure of the food pyramid, I think, like drop ball on the part of the USDA, where like seed oils, like they just like completely missed the issue. Right. And not only that, but actually perpetuated or instigated it because they were, in bed with all these industry lobbyists and groups. So like soybean, canola, sunflower oil, like these have like risen up just insanely massively over the last several decades, because it made sense from an agriculture lobby standpoint. and they didn't think anything about the health side. And like on the health side, it conformed to this narrative of like, animal fats are bad, and that the seed oils would be better. The problem is seed oils are like by definition ultra processed foods, right? They're like extracted using chemical solvents, things like hexane. They are rich in omega-6 fats. And what we're now finding, which I'm sure many of your listeners know, is that they're one of the primary drivers of chronic inflammation, which is like heart disease, autoimmune conditions, metabolic dysfunction. I mean, these are like really, really bad things. So I do think that moving away from seed oil towards, there are good oils, like vegetable oils, like avocado oil or olive oil. I think for cooking, beef tallow can be great, but I agree with you that like taking factory farmed animals and using the like fat byproduct to create beef tallow, like that's going to have a high toxin load. It's going to be poor omega profiles.
Right. When I see companies like the Shake fast food chain, they just switched the Steak and Shake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just wonder, I'm like, well, if they're getting all their beef tallow from CAFO food lots, we're just creating an altogether different set of
Totally. It's a different problem. It may, like, you can argue whether it's better or worse than seed oils. Probably from a health standpoint, it's a little bit better, but not much. And from a environmental standpoint and an animal welfare standpoint, for sure not better. So yeah, it's tough, right? Like when industry has put its thumb on the scale, or governments put its thumb on the scale, we have now like a seed oil like industrial complex that is massive. Like it's gonna be very hard to unwind given the way those supply chains are built. You've got alternatives like tallow, which are still like in terms of an ethical supply chain there and a healthy supply chain. Like, we work with White Oak Pastures that does regenerative.
Oh yeah, they're great.
They're amazing, but like there is only a handful of farms really doing that, and like they just aren't at scale. So it's going to be years, if not decade plus, for those supply chains to grow. What gives me confidence that it will happen is like the conversations are happening and consumers are smart. And I think like the role that we see Thrive Market having is being that platform to expose the issues, reward the brands that are doing the right thing, and sort of allow our members, consumers, to vote with their dollars, and kind of brands and platforms get credit for good work.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to end on the note of the depression of potential toxicity in beef tallow. So, fun question. You guys do have, back to my comment about the dark chocolate covered sea salt sprinkled almonds, certain food products that do kind of taste like crack. And again, I know you get this, Nick, and I don't want to diss Thrive Market, but a lot of your packaged foods are hyper palatable and high in calories. And I would caution people, like, just because it's healthy, you don't have to eat the whole bag. But that all being said, are there any particular products, maybe 2 or 3 that are just flying off the shelves because they're like freaking crack there?
The point that you're bringing up is actually it's a really important one, which is like healthier versus actually healthy. And as I said, part of the like fine line we have to walk is like, where are we going to plant our flag and really take a stand? And then where are we going to meet members where they are and offer them better alternatives? And so like, subbing out high fructose corn syrup, and getting in something like allulose, like that's a big win, even if that product ends up being still processed. So, allulose sweetened chocolate has been, it's awesome. It's really good.
Does not give you like bloat like that. What is it? I don't want to throw them under the bus, but I think Lily's. My wife and I used to mow through those. We're like, why do we have so much gas? And we realized like just a crap ton of sugar alcohols in it. So I did not know you guys had allulose chocolate, but so that's a plus.
To like put like chocolate's a little addictive. So is coffee. Our chocolate covered espresso beans. Like just because you said the word crack, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I mean, they are very, very good, and pack a double punch and like a very clean product.
I'm assuming like mycotoxin, mold-free bean, single estate farm, things like that.
Yeah, and so like a big thing that we're doing now is more like independent third-party testing ourselves, particularly on the own brand side. We didn't even get into this, but like heavy metals is one. That's like it's becoming a bigger thing, and people are again testing themselves and finding high levels of heavy metals, even if they're not consuming a lot of large fish. So yeah, we're all on that, and we're actually like stepping up all over it. I mean, for me personally, just looking at my kind of stuff, like I eat a lot of like just nuts and seeds. I'll put hemp seeds on everything, right? And it's just like it's great texture, like pumpkin seeds. Like so for me, like I'm a skinny guy. Like I actually have trouble keeping weight on, and like kind of maintaining muscle mass. So like I try to make sure I get enough calories, and like walnuts. That's like the go-to snack for me. Just like have a handful.
I'm big on the cacao nibs, and the unsweetened coconut flakes are probably my two, because that's like the meat of everything I put on top of my smoothies is cacao nibs and coconut flakes. Just makes any smoothie incredible. So I'll throw those two into the mix.
I'll put cacao nibs in a smoothie. So I mean, this was my smoothie this morning, and like there's probably still cacao nibs at the bottom. I will also eat cacao nibs straight. Like I'll like chew them as just kind of it's like a little stimulating. It's a little caloric. It's a little bitter.
You get your anandamide, you get your dopamine. Yeah. Nature's feel-good drug. Well, Nick, I'm sure people's mouths are watering. We don't want to make anybody drive off the road or, quit lifting weights at the gym so they can go hunt down some cacao nibs to munch on. So probably going to bring this to a close. But you guys, I'm not kidding. Thrive Market's actually just like a fun website to shop on. They really have created an incredible user experience. And now with this ability to auto-populate your cart and, the filtration mechanisms way beyond what you're going to be able to filter for it. Let's say, shopping for foods on Amazon or something like that, because they're looking at the health, right? Like keto, paleo, low carb, etc. So bengreenfieldlife.com/Nick Green, NICK Green, is where you can access the show notes. We got fat discount codes for Thrive Market. I'll put links to other podcasts I've done on things like the seed oil issue, the food dye issue, etc. And Nick, it's a pleasure. This one's been a long time coming because, as you know, I've been a customer. I even invested in you guys when, early on, close to when you launched. And I've just been a fan for the longest time. So I'm glad we were able to finally have a chat.
I'm super grateful for your support through the years. And this was fun.
All right, folks. Well, bengreenfieldlife.com/Nick Green. Have fun grocery shopping. And until next time, I'm Ben Greenfield signing out from bengreenfieldlife.com.
Do you want free access to comprehensive show notes, my weekly roundup newsletter, cutting-edge research and articles, top recommendations from me for everything that you need to hack your life, and a whole lot more? Check out bengreenfieldlife.com. It's all there. bengreenfieldlife.com. See you over there. Most of you who listen don't subscribe, like, or rate this show. If you're one of those people who do, then huge thank you. But here's why it's important to subscribe, like, and or rate this show. If you do that, that means we get more eyeballs, we get higher rankings, and the bigger the Ben Greenfield Life show gets, the bigger and better the guests get, and the better the content I'm able to deliver to you. So hit subscribe, leave a ranking, leave a review if you got a little extra time. It means way more than you might think. Thank you so much.